I came back from my mother's funeral with my heart heavier than my suitcase. The cemetery was still fresh in my mind. The sound of soil hitting wood, the quiet condolences, the way people avoid your eyes when they don't know what to say. My mother was gone. The woman who raised me, protected me, warned me, silenced forever. By the time I reached my house, the sun was setting. Everything looked the same, yet nothing felt familiar. As I walked up to my front door, I stopped. Something was there. A small black lockbox sat neatly on my doorstep, perfectly centered, as if it had been measured. It didn't belong there. No delivery label, no flowers, no note, just the box. And my address, written in handwriting I recognized instantly. My chest tightened. For a moment, I thought maybe grief was playing tricks on me. After all, grief does strange things. It blurs reality. It creates shadows where none exist. But this was real. I looked around. The street was quiet. No neighbors. No witnesses. Whoever left this box wanted privacy. Or secrecy. I picked it up. It was heavier than it should have been. Inside the house, the silence hit harder than before. The air still smelled faintly of my mother's perfume clinging to my coat. I placed the lockbox on the dining table and just stared at it. My hands were trembling. I noticed something I hadn't seen outside. A small key was taped carefully underneath the box. That's when fear settled in. People don't leave locked boxes with keys unless they want something found. And they don't do it after a funeral by accident. I sat down slowly, my heart pounding so loud it felt like it might break the quiet. I hadn't even taken off my shoes. I was still dressed in black, still mourning, still vulnerable. I whispered to the empty room, "Mom, what is this?" For the first time since her death, I felt something stronger than grief. I felt danger. And I knew deep down that whatever was inside that lockbox was about to change my life. Forever. I didn't open the lockbox right away. I circled it slowly, like it might move on its own if I got too close. The key sat there, taped neatly underneath, almost polite in its patience. Whoever left this wanted me to open it. Finally, I sat down and held the box in my lap. It was cold, solid, real. I slid the key into the lock, paused, and took a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Click. The sound echoed too loudly in the quiet house. Inside, everything was arranged with disturbing care. Neatly stacked bank statements, folders labeled by year, photocopies of jewelry receipts, items I remembered owning but hadn't seen in months, legal documents with my name typed cleanly at the top. My name, but accounts I didn't recognize. My stomach twisted. At the bottom of the box was a USB drive, wrapped in tissue paper like something fragile. Under that, a folded piece of paper. I opened it. Only one sentence was written. "You deserve to know the truth." I read it again, and again. The handwriting was careful, controlled, familiar. My hands started shaking as realization crept in, not all at once, but slowly, like cold water rising. This wasn't random. This was intentional. I spread the documents across the table, my mother's funeral still echoing in my ears. I recognized dates, transfers made when I was traveling, signatures that looked like mine but weren't. Someone had been living inside my life while I was distracted by loss. I checked my phone. No missed calls. No messages. Whoever did this didn't want a conversation. They wanted impact. As night fell, the house grew darker, but I didn't turn on the lights. I sat there surrounded by paper, realizing one painful truth. This box wasn't left to hurt me. It was left because someone thought I was too weak to fight back. They were wrong. I stared at the note again. "You deserve to know the truth." I had seen that handwriting before, not once or twice, but for years. Birthday cards, thank you notes, labels on organized folders she insisted on making for me. My daughter-in-law. The realization hit me so hard I had to sit down. She had always been helpful, too helpful. After my husband passed, she stepped in without being asked. She offered to manage my paperwork, my bills, my online accounts. "You've been through enough," she'd say. "Let me handle this." And I let her, because she was family, because she was married to my son, because I trusted her more than strangers. I picked up one of the bank statements and traced the numbers with my finger. The formatting looked professional, clean, legal, but the amounts told a different story. Small withdrawals at first, almost invisible, then larger transfers, always timed around moments when I was distracted, hospital visits, anniversaries, funerals. Planned, calculated. I felt my chest tighten, not just with anger, but with shame. How could I have missed this? How could I have handed my life over so easily? I remembered something my mother used to say: the people closest to you know exactly where to cut. I checked old emails on my phone. Messages from my daughter-in-law suddenly felt different. Her reassurances now sounded like rehearsed lines. Don't worry, I've got it covered. Trust me. Trust. That word tasted bitter now. I realized something else then, something far more unsettling. This box hadn't been left to confess. It had been left to protect someone else. Someone who didn't want to be exposed directly. And whoever that was knew exactly how fragile I was right now. But they underestimated one thing. Grief had not made me weak. It had made me aware. I didn't sleep that night. The documents from the lockbox covered my dining table like pieces of a crime scene. Every paper told a fragment of the same story, one I was only just beginning to understand. I started with the dates. Transfers lined up perfectly with the most painful moments of my life. The week my husband died, the month my mother fell ill, the days I was out of town arranging her care. Whoever did this knew exactly when I wouldn't be looking. I grabbed a notebook and began writing everything down. Account numbers, transaction amounts, company names that meant nothing to me but were repeated too often to be random. Patterns emerged. Money moved from my main account into smaller ones. From there, it disappeared into what looked like investments, until I noticed the returns were fake. Circular, designed to look active while draining funds quietly. My signature appeared on several documents. I stared at it for a long time. It was close enough to fool a system, but not close enough to fool me. Forged. My hands went cold. This wasn't someone borrowing money. This wasn't desperation. This was theft disguised as care. As dawn crept through the windows, exhaustion mixed with clarity, I realized I couldn't handle this alone. Not emotionally, not legally, but before involving anyone else, I needed the final piece. The USB drive. I held it between my fingers, hesitating. Once I opened it, there would be no going back. No pretending this was a misunderstanding. No protecting anyone out of love. I whispered my mother's name one last time and slid the USB into my laptop. The screen flickered. Folders appeared. And the truth waited, organized, labeled, undeniable. The laptop hummed softly as the folders loaded. Everything was labeled with disturbing precision. Dates, amounts, names. This wasn't chaos. This was planning. I clicked the first folder. Inside were email chains, messages between my daughter-in-law and people I didn't recognize. The language was cold, technical, stripped of emotion. She won't notice yet. We have time. Once the estate settles, accelerate phase 2. My throat tightened. They weren't worried about if I'd find out. They were calculating when. Another folder contained audio recordings. I hesitated before pressing play. Her voice filled the room. Calm, confident, professional. She's grieving. This is the safest window. I had to pause the recording. My hands were shaking too badly. The next file was a spreadsheet titled Inheritance Acceleration. Every row represented money that once belonged to me. Money intended for security, for care, for peace. It mapped out how much had already been taken and how much more was planned. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. The betrayal wasn't sudden anymore. It was layered, rehearsed, practiced. This wasn't just about greed. It was about control. I finally understood why the lockbox had been left at my door. Someone involved had decided this had gone too far. Someone with a conscience or fear. But they hadn't stepped forward. They had pushed the truth into my hands and walked away. As the sun rose higher, one thing became clear. Grief had made them careless, and they had underestimated me. As the morning light filled the room, one question refused to leave my mind. Why now? Why leave the lockbox on the very day I returned from my mother's funeral? I went back through the files again, slower this time. Not looking at numbers, but at timing. Dates jumped out immediately. Large transfers had been scheduled for the coming weeks, bigger than anything taken before. Then it hit me. My mother's death had triggered changes in my estate. Inheritance timelines, legal access. They assumed I'd be too broken to notice. Grief wasn't just my weakness to them. It was their opportunity. They believed I would be distracted, overwhelmed, incapable of fighting back, that I would sign anything put in front of me just to make the pain stop. I remembered my daughter-in-law's last message before the funeral. Don't worry about paperwork right now. Focus on family. At the time, it sounded kind. Now, it sounded strategic. I closed my eyes and felt anger rise, not wild, not loud, but sharp and focused. The kind that clears your vision instead of blinding it. My mother had survived wars, poverty, and loss. She taught me that silence is power, but so does action. They thought grief had weakened me. They were wrong. Grief had stripped everything unnecessary away, and what remained was clarity. I picked up my phone and made a call, not to family, not to friends, but to a lawyer whose name I found through a quiet recommendation. When he answered, I said calmly, "I think I've been robbed, and I have proof." There was a pause. Then he replied, "Bring everything." As I gathered the documents back into the lockbox, I understood one final thing. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about reclaiming my life. I invited them for dinner. Nothing dramatic, nothing suspicious, just a quiet message asking if they could stop by that evening. My son replied quickly. My daughter-in-law took longer, but she agreed. When they arrived, everything looked normal on the surface. Polite smiles, casual conversation. She even brought dessert. I waited until we were seated. Then I placed the lockbox in the center of the table. The change in her face was instant. Color drained from her skin. Her hand tightened around her glass. My son looked confused, then alarmed. "What's that?" he asked. I didn't answer. I opened the box and slid the documents across the table. Bank statements, printed emails, screenshots from the USB files. Silence. Finally, she spoke. Calmly, carefully. "You're misunderstanding what you're seeing." I asked her one question. "Did you take my money?" She didn't answer right away. Then she tried to explain. Investments. Timing. Technical language meant to overwhelm and confuse. When that failed, her tone shifted. She said she was protecting me, that I wasn't capable of managing things alone, that everything would have been returned eventually. Eventually. My son finally spoke, his voice shaking. "Is this true?" She looked at him, but she didn't deny it. That moment broke something I can never repair. When I told them I'd already contacted a lawyer, she stood up abruptly. Her calm cracked. "You're making a mistake," she warned. "This will destroy your family." I met her eyes and said quietly, "You already did." They left without saying goodbye. And as the door closed behind them, I realized something painful but necessary. The truth doesn't destroy families. Lies do. The legal process didn't begin with shouting or dramatic speeches. It began with silence. A silence broken only by printers, staplers, and the steady voice of my lawyer as he reviewed the evidence. Page after page. File after file. He didn't interrupt me once. When he finally looked up, his expression told me everything. "This is serious," he said, "and it's very well documented." Subpoenas were filed. Banks were contacted. Accounts were frozen before money could disappear again. The same systems that had once protected my daughter-in-law now turned against her. She fought back, aggressively. Her lawyers claimed misunderstandings, permissions, implied consent. But numbers don't lie, and neither do timestamps, recordings, and forged signatures. During mediation, she never apologized. Not once. She looked irritated. offended, as if I had inconvenienced her. My son sat beside her, silent and pale, trapped between truth and loyalty. I didn't look at him. I couldn't, not yet. When the judge reviewed the USB evidence, the room changed. The recording stripped away every excuse. Intent became undeniable. Orders were issued, assets seized, accounts reversed, investigations expanded. The judge's final words echoed in my ears. This was not assistance. This was exploitation. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt no triumph, only relief, because the truth, once exposed, could no longer be buried under family titles and polite lies. But I also knew this wasn't over. Justice always collects its price. I got most of the money back. The lawyers called it a success. The bank called it a recovery. On paper, everything balanced out again. But life doesn't work on spreadsheets. My son stopped calling. Not because I was wrong, but because the truth demanded he choose sides. And silence was easier than choosing. I heard through others that his marriage was struggling. That resentment had replaced trust. That guilt had found a home between them. None of that brought me comfort. I attended the final hearing alone. When the judge confirmed the restitution and penalties, I nodded politely and walked out without looking back. At home, the house felt different. Quieter. Not empty, but altered. I went through old photo albums that night. My mother holding me as a child. Family holidays. Smiles that hadn't yet learned how fragile trust could be. I realized then that blood does not guarantee loyalty, and love does not excuse betrayal. I had protected myself, but at a cost no one warns you about. Still, when I looked in the mirror, I saw someone who had chosen dignity over denial. And that mattered. Months passed. The noise faded first. The calls, the meetings, the paperwork. What remained was quiet. Not the heavy silence of grief, but a softer one. The kind that lets you breathe again. One afternoon, I found myself standing at my mother's old dresser. In the bottom drawer, beneath neatly folded scarves, was a note written in her familiar hand. I had never seen it before. It was short. If you ever feel alone, remember this. Truth is a form of love, even when it hurts. I sat on the edge of the bed and cried, not from pain, but from understanding. The lockbox had done more than expose theft. It had returned something to me. My voice. I used part of the recovered money to secure my future, but more importantly, I changed how I lived. I stopped apologizing for asking questions. I stopped confusing kindness with surrender. I don't know if my son will ever come back into my life. I hope he does. But hope no longer controls my boundaries. As for my daughter-in-law, she disappeared from my world the moment the truth surfaced. And I let her go without bitterness, because carrying anger would only give her one last victory. I placed the empty lockbox on a shelf in my study, not as a reminder of betrayal, but as proof of survival. Some inherit wealth, some inherit wounds. I inherited clarity, and that finally was enough.